Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Messaging Maven. Today, we're going to be talking about, I guess, one of my favorite topics. Realistically, it's not one of my favorite topics because, it's a good topic in the sense of it has a positive connotation, but rather because it's a topic we've been working on for quite a long time. And as you can see, I'm not alone. And this time, I've brought Karl. Karl is our anti-fraud specialist. And tell me, Karl, who are you? What do you do in Messente?
Hi, so I'm Karl. I'm working on the anti-fraud section of Messente, which essentially is my job is to prevent fraud from getting through. Mm-hmm. So any message that contains, let's say, a fraudulent link or is trying to scam people out of money, my job is to stop that.
Mm-hmm. Karl is the Batman of Messente, the hero we need, but sometimes don't deserve. From that perspective, so we're talking scam and fraud. We're talking a little bit about today what's been going on in 2023. What can we look forward to in 2024? What are some of the trends we're thinking about? What are the things we're seeing? If anybody has any questions, as per usual, write them down, and at the end we'll get to them as well. But so let's start from the very beginning. What types of scams are there? What are the things that we've seen so far?
So far, actually, most of it has been towards financial institutions, banks, and the other section is the couriers. Mm-hmm. So all the package deliveries and so on. Mm-hmm. And for us, it actually really started in Q4 of 22. Mm-hmm. Before that, on smaller amounts, but Q4 took a really hike towards the top mm-hmm. in terms of attempts. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As an example, one of our clients, a bank, fraudulent domains targeting them specifically mm-hmm. rose to 150 in mm-hmm. Q4, mm-hmm, while mm-hmm. before that, it was 3, 4, 5, 6, around that. Mm-hmm. So Q4 really 2022 marks the really big start for us.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because we're talking about messaging fraud, but there's it's obviously digital fraud in and of itself is quite broad between the most common maybe channels or the most known channels between email, SMS, and voice. So how do those work? How does it work even on a broader scale? If we step out of business messaging for a second and look at the overall challenge, what's sort of the similarities and what are the differences between those various channels?
Well, if we talk about email versus SMS versus voice, mm-hmm. Email is of course the most commonly used. Mm-hmm. It's the most common way to try to scam people. And due to that, we're actually quite wary of the emails we're receiving. Mm-hmm. The trust level is a bit lower, mm-hmm. and the email, it usually tries to target local language as well, mm-hmm. trying to use the local language. And for a long time, it was more like a really good comedy mm-hmm. to receive an email in local language because a lot of the people had to decipher what the content actually was, what mm-hmm. they were trying to say with mm-hmm. it. And you could understand immediately that it was Google Translate or something similar. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Email has gotten better over time, but still, I think it's still it's so commonly used that people know it. Mm-hmm. SMS, in its nature, it's super simple. It's just a text, usually below 160 characters. It's really focused, short. There's no high in the beginning, and it's just really targeted transactional messages, for example. Mm-hmm. And those are like really easy to spoof, let's say. Mm-hmm. And if we talk about voice, mm-hmm. then the social engineering comes into play strongly, because once you get the person on the call, you get to portray the tone of your voice. You're trying to portray the hurriness of the situation, and they might fall for it.
Mm-hmm. What about robocalls? Because I think this is something that was brought out by the Estonian police quite recently as well. How do they fit into this sort of scenario?
Yeah, they are working towards the voice part. Last few days there has been 100 calls to Estonians in English, of course, because luckily our language is something that is protecting us. But yeah, those are towards the fraud, the voice section, and unfortunately, the voice is most, most successive of those three.
Yeah, I mean it's also the most personal, right? And we'll be
Exactly.
dipping our toes into talking a little bit about how AI plays into all of this and everything else. But it's an interesting topic to understand the differences between channels. Nick Lane from Mobile Square actually shared some data about how large portion of the total amount of emails sent is fraudulent versus how many messages in total of the total pool of text messages sent around the world, especially from the A2P context, of course, are fraudulent. And the difference was something between, there's clean traffic out of 100% in email, it would be 60% clean, 40%, fishy. And on text messaging side, you would have something, I think it was 3.3% spam and 3.6% scam, right? So you're talking about like 7-8% of total fraudulent messages. So as a channel, it's much more clean. But the big problem there is it's also that much more invasive. It's that much more personal. It's that much more in your face compared to an email. And easier maybe to not make grammatical mistakes and create, the comedy that we've been used to over the years in that context as well. But okay, so all of these have different dynamics to them. All of them have these different methods of how they function and what the sort of the main key idea behind the transaction in them is. But can you lose a bunch of money by just one click?
That's a bit difficult topic. But let's make it simple. Let's divide it into two. Let's say 0 click, 1 click. 0 click is something that the person doesn't have to do anything. They just, let's say the fraudster knows your number, and that's all they need. 0 click vulnerability in a phone costs a lot, like a really lot. Of course, there are options to, let's say, bug bounties. So escalating the vulnerabilities to the creators of the, let's say, app or or iOS. But let's say if you're looking to make money with that vulnerability, you're looking at Xerodium is one of the brokers, the most common one, up to 2.5 mil for 0 click vulnerability.
Yeah.
1 click is about 1.5, I think, or so. And so essentially you're looking like a lot of money that it's difficult to make with an SMS purely on the fact that how many messages you have to send. And the more you use it, the more quickly it gets patched. So 1 click essentially requires, let's say, clicking a link, which is the most common way an SMS is built, like the fraudulent part of it.
Yeah.
You click on a link and you're taken to a page. For there to download to happen, what they need is, it's called try-by download. Try-by attack just automatically start the download to get some malware into your phone. Again, you need a vulnerability within iOS itself, and that costs. So essentially, clicking on a link, you're still safe, but there's always that 0.0001% of chance that something might happen.
Yeah, so essentially the idea is that what they're usually making use of is not some very super high level vulnerability that's built into either iOS or Android or any other sort of hardware position where if you do manage to find that, you'd actually probably make more money from just pointing it out to Apple and getting your multiple $1 million bug bounty instead of, starting to use that for scam, which, with all of its side effects coming into play as well. It's more about the fact that you need an entry point for a person to do something. And then when they start doing something, it needs to be convincing enough for them to essentially follow through with the entire thing. So, 0 click, 1 click being less likely, but 1 click can be the trigger point for a succession of events that then leads the scam in a way. So one of the things that we've seen, and I think we've talked about it in previous lives as well, one of the use cases we've been talking about with one of the bigger logistics provider here in Estonia as well, has been that a person goes to a web store, purchases an item, chooses a courier to get it actually sent to them, and half an hour later they get a fraudulent message from that same courier that's actually a scam message. So how did these things happen? How does that come about?
So if the message gets sent, usually the couriers and similar companies are, let's say, 0 or 1 hop. I think maximum 2 to the operator. So they're really close to the operator, which means that for something like this to happen, there has to be someone within the courier system or the operator system, which is highly unlikely. And if you even get access like that, you won't be using it to send some random SMS message that you hope that catches somebody. So essentially it's 99.9999% random. Just a coincidence, because your number just happened to be one of those 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other possibility that we discussed with the same logistics provider was that if you're buying from a smaller e-store, for example, a one-man web store, essentially, that's more like, either drop shipping or something like that, then there's a possibility that that website hasn't gotten all of the necessary security updates because most of the time they're expensive, etc. So that's the more probable point of ingress. But then again, the question is, why would you use that point of ingress for that scam purpose as compared to using it to just directly, steal data, do fraud, something like that? So the question is always, what's the quickest path of success for a scammer to actually get to? So the question sort of arises from that is that why is text messaging scam so effective? Why is it working so well? And how effective actually is it?
So first of all, as I said previously, email, not so trustworthy. But SMS, we sometimes tend to trust blindly. We see the name of our bank or the courier at the header, and we're like, this has to be from them. So the trust, I think it's the main reason why it's working. The other is the cost versus reward, and that is significant. So let's do blunt numbers. Let's say a 100K campaign of scam messages gets sent with the average cost of SMS 0.07. The cost total for the fraudster is 7,000 euros. Looks like, feels like a lot. Let's make it more difficult. Let's say 98% of it gets caught. So that means 98,000 messages get wiped away. They don't reach 2002. From that number, let's say to break even, the average cost of fraudulent activities like gaining is 800 euros or so. For them to break even, they essentially have to reach 9 people out of those 2,000 people, because then they get on top of the more than 7,000 euros. That's purely to break even. So we're talking about 9 people out of 100,000.
Yeah. the success rate is what, like 0.009, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, from the total campaign, yeah.
And just for reference, if you're thinking about like click-through rates or conversion rates on something like, Facebook, 0.5% is seen as pretty reasonable, or at least, doable. So if you're thinking about the context, it's hundreds of times lower of a barrier to achieve just for break even. And the other fun part about it is that there are a lot of different metrics around this. The most common metric we've seen from industry research is that the average cost of an SMS scam is about 800 euros to the actual victim. But there's also other ones done. I think in 2021, there was a research document created by the European Commission. And that was targeted towards digital fraud as a whole. And it brought out that the susceptibility for digital fraud is, the conversion rate is around 20-ish, if you think about all of the different versions that are out there, with the average damage being about 80 euros per damage. So for text messaging scam, it tends to range from 1 to 4% at 800 euros of damage. Overall digital fraud, 20% conversion, 80 euros of damage. If you actually put it into numbers in the context of a 100,000 message campaign, it's kind of ends up being the exact same damage towards the cost part. And the big thing that people don't talk about a lot in terms of where the cost comes from is that, and I think that a lot of people listening and anybody who sees this will resonate with quite a lot, is that if you get scammed 20 euros, you're not going to talk about it because it's kind of embarrassing. And that's the big problem. I think that a majority of the scam that happens is invisible to us because we don't talk about it. Now, we talk about the cases where we've seen them come in as well, where somebody gets scammed out of like 4,000 euros, 5,000 euros. You're going to make a noise when that happens. But if you lose 20, you're just going to go, I'm an idiot for clicking on that link.
You're just going to eat the...
You're just going to take it in and it's fine, right? You just sort of go, next time I won't click on it. So who's doing this? Who are actually running these types of scams, organizations? How is this functioning as a whole?
When we think about digital fraud and fraud overall, our first impression and thought is it has to be large groups, like organized crime, kind of like groups running the show. Well, there are groups in play as well. In a lot of cases, the scammers actually have been underage people. Or they are just regular university students trying to make themselves some money. And they tend to be like technically really knowledgeable. They know how to search for it, and they know how to look up the information because more often than not, they know the English language.
Yeah.
So they know how to look for the information. And that is one of the key aspects of the AI as well. It's not just the text building, it's searching for information. And AI helps there a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's also the automation of, if you think about it from the context of those, larger groups. And I remember talking to the Estonian police, and the metric they threw out there was that, 80% of the scam is done by 20% of the organizations, as a sort of general rule of thumb. But for them, AI presents an opportunity to automate domain purchases.
Yeah.
And that's been something that's been super hard to kind of keep track of this year. As you brought out with the LHV example as well, all of a sudden there's 150 different URLs that are being spoofed. So the net becomes that much broader that we need to cast in a way. What's the nastiest scam you've seen?
So when we're talking about where everything might head, it's the personalization part. And the nastiest ones I've seen are to do with person's name in the beginning. The content itself is super crisp. Like there's no mistakes. Saw it in Estonia as well, in our home country. And like there are no grammatical mistakes like that in the content. And like URLs are constantly changing, etc. So this is something that has been hard to deal with. But luckily, humans are creatures of habit. And that aspect has been something that has been helping me a lot.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit without giving too much away to the scammers listening?
Let's say if they're using a system, like they're using a system that works, they're not going to change it. They're going to continue using it until it doesn't work. So as long as you know the system, you can keep tap on them.
Okay, makes sense. But what are they doing then to prevent getting caught? If we can understand the systems, what are they doing to prevent that?
The most simple thing that they're using is IP block. So if you're from another country where they started, let's say, the scam message with the URL, and you just try to, let's say, take a look what's within the scam message itself, you get directed to the original page of the courier they're impersonating, because they have IP whitelist, blacklist in place. And if you're not the resident IP or you're not the target, as they're sending SMS messages, they're looking for user agents. So if you're not in that section, you're gonna get redirected further. So you might get the impression that, okay, it's the actual courier sending the messages, so it should be okay. Well, it's not.
I think it's interesting as well, because that sort of maybe highlights the difficulty of us trying to actually crack down on this and understand whether the piece of content is legitimate or not. And there's a whole aspect of then bringing in GDPR and whether you're able to actually process these things and whether you're allowed to process these things, and the complications of trying to fight fraud while simultaneously having one hand tied behind your back because we're governed by legislature and they're not. So actually bringing that into the fold as well. Okay. So what can companies do to protect themselves?
First of all, try to figure out whether you can be a target or not. Financial institutions, couriers. First of all, give out information to your customers. Which link are you using, or links? The domains, URLs within the SMS message. Because sender IDs can be spoofed. Content can be whatever. But the domain is that part of the SMS message that you have full control over. It can't be made to look something else. So if we were, if Messente was a bank, we will give out to our customers that we send with Messente.com. That's it. That's our URL. Giving that information to customers help them to get used to your brand, your domains, your information. And in the long run, you're going to protect your clients by that. Second part is definitely short links. If you use short links, they're going to use short links. If it's absolutely necessary, use branded ones. But in most cases, it's not. Short links, just, don't.
Yeah. I get what you mean. I mean, we've been talking about this from the marketing context as well when we did the Black Friday thing, where, a lot of people will want to create a personalized URL for their campaign, like blackfriday.whateverbankname.com or vip.bankname or .com or whatever. The problem there is that every single time you introduce a new permutation to the mix, you're also opening up a door, because if you have vip.bank, I can go out and buy vip-bank.
Exactly.
Bank-vip, bank.vip. I can always buy something that is very similar that will then be very difficult to discern for the person as well. So in this sea of difficulty, what can people do to protect themselves?
First of all, try to understand what links is your bank using. That's the first thing. And try to understand the fact that if bank sends you an SMS and trying to give it some urgency or so, you can always go through the official domain of the bank. Check if you have the notification there. Because in most cases, they're trying to say like, oh, there's something wrong with your account, etc. Log in over here. or there's been some transfer and we have to hurry. Bank doesn't need your confirmation to protect your asset because they're protecting their asset as well. They don't need your confirmation that, yes, please do protect me. No.
Yeah, and on top of that as well, I like the point about banks never only use one singular channel.
Exactly.
Like if that notification came via text message, it's going to be on the dashboard of your e-bank or your app or wherever. It's always a multi-notification situation when a bank actually goes about it. But make sure it isn't email that you go to. Make sure that you know that position is there. It's much harder to crack a bank's app than it is to spoof an SMS and an email together. So having that combination. Okay, so to wrap this up a little bit, let's look into 2024. We're talking about AI. We've talked about the multiple use cases of that to enhance quality, enhance the profile of what's going on. But what else? What could it affect in addition?
In my opinion, 2024 will be like spear phishing. It will be really targeted because AI part doesn't only come into play in the text generation. You can sort data with it. You can generate text. You can teach it to. You can tell it to teach you how to like build scripts. You can ask it to build scripts to send messages. So I think it will be personalized a bit more. So far, it has been like en masse, but yeah, 2024 personalization.
Got it. Makes sense. Now, I think this is the last important bit that I want to talk about for a second here. Big news last week. RCS now on Apple as well, or not now, but coming to Apple as well, making it potentially the next big thing within business messaging. It's already being used for scam. What are we seeing in terms of that? What's the potential there, and how do you think that'll play out?
I think RCS will play into the multi-channel idea. So again, 2024, the other thing that is going to hit is the multi-channel. You get SMS, you get a follow-up call, let's say, you get RCS. So it's currently used via P2P channels, the fraud part. But yeah, it's going to play into the multi-channel part.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that really worrying me about RCS and other channels as well, I mean, we're already seeing WhatsApp being used for blending purposes, essentially where a WhatsApp message is less expensive than an SMS message. Certain players within the market will simply overwrite your content and send it via WhatsApp rather than SMS, and will do so essentially via their own agent that they've registered for themselves, which is, again, unfortunately, none of these things are like super hard to do. So that's one of the ways to go about it. But what we're seeing in RCS is even the last example of a scam that we saw, I think it was Vodafone Germany or somebody who shared that, or Deutsche Telekom or whatever, was the use case where the scammers would create a group chat on B2B with a random number that they were looking to target, then would use it and create for that group name, would create the sender name of Deutsche Post or whatever, and would then send the fraudulent message into that channel. So the thing that I'm really cautious about is that SMS is an old channel. It's quite well known. The intricacies of it also are quite well understood. So there's a very little new stuff that will be on the market. However, RCS in that scene hasn't been that new and hasn't been broken yet. And I think that there's a large possibility that that channel will start seeing a whole host of new methods of abuse, especially also taking into consideration that the usage of it can be quite fractured between different operators and what the regulations are and what you need to register and how you need to send, like in SMS it is as well. At least there you kind of understand the base level. Maybe I'm quite doom and gloom, but at the same time, I think that RCS also presents a big opportunity for improvement, because you can send a text message and it will look exactly like your brand wants it to look like visually. Human beings are very visual people. So if you see it coming from a legitimate Apple account, legitimate Apple sender ID, legitimate sort of company profile, the carousels, the text, etc., you see it's legitimate. And when companies start using that brand voice on those channels as well, it becomes so much more effective. It's an example, I think, that James Williams made, friend of the channel, friend of the company. And he brought out that when you get an Apple product, you know it's an Apple product. And when you get a knockoff of an Apple product, you kind of know it's a knockoff of an Apple product. It's the same way, hopefully, that these messaging channels will work as well. Cool. Last thoughts about 2024. Anything else we missed?
Not that I can think of. It's just for the regular people out there. If you receive scam message, escalate it. Please report it. Report it to a bank. Report it to the operator. Report it somewhere, because you might know that it's scam, but other people might not. And in that way, you might be protecting them as well.
Yeah, or report it to us, and we'll find a way to do something about it.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's get to questions. I assume we have a fair few. Suzanne Lauer, what are the common mistakes companies do that make them vulnerable to scammers? One of the examples we brought out is especially the first thing was that the utilization of non-brand related URLs, which means you open yourself up to anybody spoofing your URLs immediately, which is quite easy to do. Also, not advocating with your operators. And this is, by the way, a thing that a lot of companies don't know about. And what we've done is on the wholesale market, and we do handle a large portion of the traffic that comes into Estonia from outside of Estonia. So what we do is we block very common sender IDs from being used, big banks, big logistics companies, etc. But the operators can do that as well. You just need to go and tell them that nobody else besides either this aggregator or nobody else besides the operator themselves that they're working with can use this sender ID. It's only for our business, and have those blacklisted, whitelisted, and request operators to do so, because it is a possibility to do that. So a big problem, I think, is that on the channel of SMS, the question of fraud isn't taught about that often. And I think that's a big mistake that people think of. They don't think of it from a fraud context. They quite often think about it, how would it convert best? Sometimes you need to think, okay, so how can I avoid fraud from this particular matter? Anything to add?
Super simple. Yeah. Super good.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, let's see. Who's next? Good. Besides keeping the pipes clean, filters, blocking traffic, what do you think about future possibilities of better profiling senders using AI and improving our community efforts for defending the communication ecosystem, cooperation with communication service players, shared access negative database, etc.? What do you think?
Well, if the fraudsters are using AI, they are constantly improving. Yeah. They are getting better. And so same has to be with us. We have to get better as well. So implementing AI to prevent fraud is the steps to take to stop that traffic.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Better profiling and using AI to get better at understanding the baselines and what is trusted and what isn't is key for us as well. It's a super complicated topic, especially taking into consideration what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. But the second point is, should we be improving community efforts for defending the ecosystem? Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, such a large portion of this problem is the fact that businesses, and not businesses, but criminal organizations or anybody looking to scam, can still have access to platforms to send these messages. If they don't have access, if you have proper vetting in place, if it's difficult for them to set up an account and send scam messages, then this is a much easier problem to deal with, at least in my, rainbows and unicorns world. But absolutely. I think the speed of sharing information between each other is also one key part of this. When we're slow.
And I think it's one key factor is if an aggregator, on their home market, not only work with the operators, but work with authorities as well. Contact banks, let's not even trying to sell anything, but just cooperate, because that's the key factor to essentially lowering the impact of the fraudsters.
Yeah, working not just based off of your own benefit, but for the benefit of the community.
Exactly.
So ultimately, if this channel gets soiled, our business will be affected by that anyways as well. Cool. Let's see what else we have. Helen K. How will the rise of scams affect the credibility of the messaging industry? Well, that's a nice segue because that's literally the last question I talked about. And you can already see that. We've been talking about AIT since the start of the year, right? And what we've seen is some major brands transitioning away from SMS over to email, over to other channels because they got fraud messages targeted towards them. Not the same times as scams. We're talking about artificial boosting. But it's the same thing. If a channel is no longer trustworthy, the usage of it becomes lessened. The same way if you make it more expensive, it gets used less.
Yeah.
So I think that it will absolutely potentially have an effect on the channel. And it'll also, I think, have a bigger effect on the adoption of new channels. Because if you start adopting RCS and it's already riddled with different types of fraud, are you going to want to take that leap? I don't know. Maybe use something else. Actually, no. Use the channels. They're really good. Let's see what else we have. Are the scams country-based in terms of spoofing companies, or is it usually random selection? This one's for you.
The content are something that are similar in let's take Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, and sometimes you can see the trend that it starts, one specific content starts in Sweden, it goes through Estonia, and it goes to Latvia. The same content, but just different language. So, the scam, sometimes it is like super specific, one country based, and only like tailored for a specific courier or bank. But more often than not, it's reused.
Yeah, it's this idea that it can pop up in 5 different countries with just regional differences. There's also this idea that what we've seen this year is using the same trigger point and the same template, but in different countries at different times. What I mean by this is Estonian tax returns are usually done February, March. And then, Latvians do it at a different time, Polish do it at a different time, and Swedes do it at a different time. The use case is the same for the scam. It's just used in the regional context correctly at the most effective time.
Exactly.
And that's kind of where the regional base quite often comes into question as well. Let's take 2 more and then draw this to a close. Can you talk about how you combat scam besides filtering and blocking messages? Good question. One of the biggest things about this is cooperation with the authorities, as well as the banks, as well as the mobile network operators as well, sharing the intel, talking about, this is what we see, these are the instances, what we've seen, this is what you should do in terms of best practices, even getting to a point where, we see in certain countries great examples of what should be done. And this is the example that we've shared multiple times. HSBC UK has this specific site that describes directly with images what messages they send and what messages they don't send. Examples of fraud and examples of what their legitimate content looks like. So if you're going to use the channel, this is one of the things that you could do, and during even the account sign-up process or from time to time, remind the clients of doing that. So best practices. What else?
To the previous, as a remark, providing the content you send might be counteractive. If the fraudsters are in other side of the world, they might not know what you're sending with or how you're sending the messages. So that might work against you. But educating your clients what they might send the fraudsters, that's something to do.
Okay, got it. Good. And from a technological perspective, there's quite often very little you can do in a market unless you have a good hold on the visibility there. But there are a lot of entities that you can work together with and share intel too, even testing platforms, and having the cooperation with them of this is what we're seeing, what are you seeing, right? And having that cross-functional possibility to share this data and do something about it, as well as advise operators, even to an extent. This is what you can do, this is what you can't do. Yes, we've been down this road multiple times where the things that we put in place, they say they can't. Well, realistically, you can. But maybe it's just advocacy is a big part of this as well. Cool. Let's take the last one. Similar to AIT prevention tools, do you think there are any tools that can stop scam from getting through?
Well, there are a lot of ways to automate the fraud protection. One is, of course, the domain intelligence. What is the domain? What does it consist of? Is there any pattern there that has been used before in a scam? So the domain is a large part of it, because you can always change the content. You can add, let's say, if it matches 80% or so, but eventually they're gonna find new contents. But the domain is usually something that is reused, the facade of it.
Yeah, and another thing is that it's not a question of can tools protect, it's to which extent will they protect. And I'll draw the parallel from anything relating to exclusive gateways. There are still ways to pass those exclusive gateways and get access to alternative routing channels and find ways into those markets. And as long as those exist, scam will always get there to an extent as well. And those are multi-billion-dollar companies building those gateways for whom it's a major part of their business. So it's a question of how much will get through. And fraud and scam has been a part of essentially our everyday life since forever, really. Fraudulent transactions, selling of snake oil, whatever. It's just a question of at which point in time because the actual fraud becomes debilitating to the channel or debilitating to the way business is done, as compared to just being a natural part of things and just us accepting it. In a way, how blending is kind of accepted to a degree as well. Cool. We can talk about this topic to, till the cows come home, but any closing thoughts?
Try to work with your local authorities. That it helps so much to get the banks behind the table, to get the police, like giving information to them. Let's say local CERT, who can do a lot. That's one thing that every aggregator should do at their home market.
Yeah, I agree. Just communicate more. That always leads to better results. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for the great questions. And I'll gladly talk to everybody else soon at the next event. Have a great one. Ciao.